Hey, I'm John Davidson, and this is Son of David Messages. Today I have a message for the hopeless. So let me ask you: Are you hopeless? Like truly hopeless? You feel like you have no future, no hope for the future. It just seems dark or dim. Then let me encourage you today with an encouraging story, and that hopefully that will change all that and give you some bit of hope. And this story has a happy ending, right? Because those are my favorite types of stories. I feel like a story with a happy ending, those are the ones that have the most meaning, right? But I've learned that what makes a good story is that the story's not all good, right? Because if it was all good, then we really can't appreciate a happy ending. So there has to be some kind of conflict, some sadness, or some kind of tragedy, darkness, or whatever it is. It has to be something that has to be overcome to provide contrast and comparison, right? To arrive at a happy ending. And our lives are stories, right? Just like this book, our lives is telling a story, and it has different chapters, sections, highs and lows, wins, losses, tragedies, and triumphs, right? It has a beginning and it has an end. And just like my favorite types of stories, our lives can have happy endings, right? But it's not without some kind of unhappiness, right? Some unhappy chapters. And those unhappy chapters, they're dark times, right? They're tragic chapters. Those chapters in our lives, they're not preferable, and they're not enjoyable. But when we go through them, they feel like the worst thing in the world. But they make for a great overall story, right? And they make for a good story in the end. They make for a great life in the end. And your life can have a happy ending. And I want to show you how. So I'm going to show you that with a book, one of my favorite books in the Bible. It's a real small book, but I think it's an important book. It's the book of Ruth. And before we jump into it, I want to give you some context to kind of set the scene, right? So Ruth is a real small book. It's 4 chapters, but it's powerful. And it's an important book in the Bible. And personally, to me, I call Ruth a transition book. And that means that it's a book that connects different time periods, right? It's a book that kind of connects 2 different or multiple different time periods where God is transitioning the nation of Israel in a bunch of ways, right? So first, he's transitioning them in their leadership, where they're going from a time where they're ruled by judges or governed by judges to a time where they're going to be ruled by kings. And then he's transitioning them in their worship, right? Their place of worship, where they worship God in a tabernacle, which is a tent of meetings, where his presence dwelt. They're going from that to a time of worship in a temple, which is kind of like a tabernacle, but it's stable. A tabernacle can move, a temple doesn't. It's more of a stationary building. And he's also transitioning them in their covenant, which is like it's like a contract they have with God, right? So that you could say that they're in a contract season, right? They're renewing their contract with God. So, and he's taking them from a time where they're going from a Palestinian covenant, which is the Promised Land covenant, where God promises them land, actual land. And then they're going from that into a Davidic covenant, where God promises them a king through King David, right? But one thing I want you to see through all that, I said that for a reason, is all those transitions have a common theme. And that theme is movement from a time of instability to a time of establishment, right? Foundation. And that's important to keep in mind, especially as we go through the story. God is laying a foundation at that moment, at this moment in time. He's stabilizing his people. And you should pay attention to in-between times or transition times in your own life, right? Because maybe God is using it to better stabilize you. And maybe he's using it to establish you and set you on more of a sturdy foundation, right? And that's what he's doing right here at this time with Israel, with the children of Israel. And to me, I always thought it was interesting that he's using a love story to do that, right? To connect these different time periods. He's using a love story. and that's what Ruth is, right? It's a love story, but it's not just a typical love story, right? It's a highly unlikely love story between Ruth and an Israelite. And the reason it's unlikely is because Ruth is a Moabite, right? And she marries an Israelite, which is if you understood the history, then you would understand that is on something that's highly unlikely. Because Ruth, she being a Moabite, her ancestor was Moab, right? And Moab is the son of Lot, and he's actually the son of Lot and Lot's oldest daughter, right? So the story is Lot had sons with both his daughters. They fled from Sodom and Gomorrah. His wife looked back, she turned into salt, and him and his two daughters, they flee to the mountains, right? It's a crazy story, but it's not the scope of this story, so I won't go into it too much. But the name Moab actually means from the father, right? Seed from the father. And like I said, you can read about that in Genesis chapter 19. That's a story for another time. But there weren't any men around, so Lot's daughters, they got him drunk, and they had children with him, and he didn't know it. So, but Lot was the nephew of Abraham, and Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob, who God changed his name to Israel, and Israel then has 12 sons. Those 12 sons, they marry, they multiply, they become the 12 tribes of Israel. And those tribes turn into a nation of Israel, right? And that nation of Israel is the same nation that we know today. So all that to give you some family history to let you know that Israelites and Moabites, they're related in their ancestry, but later on they become enemies in their descendants, right? So Ruth is an unlikely love story. It's not supposed to happen. And sometimes in our lives, God would include certain unlikely events like this, right? Like finding love in unlikely places, or we just unlikely meeting unlikely people, unlikely circumstances, right? So I set the scene, and then we'll jump into a story. But before we get into it, I just want to say that I do love the book of Ruth. It's packed for just being 4 chapters. Very powerful, very important. But I don't have time to dig into all the nuances and the goodies that's packed in the book. One day I will do a separate message so I can do the book justice, right? But for now, that's not the scope. I'll do just a high level scope to give you the overall story, right? So Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah, and they reached Moab. And when they reached Moab, they settled there. When Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone, without her 2 sons and her husband. So right off we see that the story doesn't even start with Ruth, right? It starts with her mother-in-law, Naomi. And Naomi and her husband Elimelech, they're from Judah, right? It's the tribe of Judah, it's Judah, the tribe of Israel, and the Bible calls them Ephrathites because they're from Bethlehem. And Ephrath is an ancient name for the city of Bethlehem in Judah, right? So I don't want you to be confused. They're from the tribe of Judah, so they're Israelites by nationality, who live in a city called Bethlehem, which used to be called Ephrath. So they're called Ephrathites. Just like I'm African American by nationality, but I live in a city called Buffalo, so I can be called African American and Buffalonian, right? So the story starts off with Elimelech and his wife, and they start off in a not so good situation, right? A famine. And then they move to another place in hopes of a better life. And hope is a beautiful thing, right? It's a powerful thing, and it's a great thing until it's deferred, right? Proverbs chapter 13 verse 12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a dream fulfilled is a tree of life." And that means that hope, when it's stretched out and drawn out too thin or too long, it makes the heart sick. So Elimelech and Naomi move away from the drought, and they have hopes of a better life, right? But then that hope gets shattered when Elimelech died, and then their two sons died, right? They left, leaving Naomi alone. Now, imagine how heartbroken and how hopeless she must have felt, right? How dark the dark time that she was in. Right? She left because she left a not so good situation, right, with a glimmer of hope. She had a little bit of hope, and then everything just went sour, right? And then she was faced with dark situations back to back, and that's how life hits us sometimes. That's how our dark seasons, they come up on us, right, suddenly, right, unexpectedly. And the thing that you should understand, though, and that we all should understand, really, is that we're going to face dark times, right? All of us. Nobody's exempt from dark times. But one thing to remember is that when you're in your dark moments and your dark seasons, just make sure you're not alone, right? That's one thing to make that's one key thing you have to understand, because alone is a very, like, it's a dangerous place to be, especially after a loss, right? After any dark time, it's not good to be alone, right? That's what the Bible says. It's not good for mankind to be alone. So do whatever you got to do, make changes, make moves, pick up and leave if you have to. Just make sure you don't go through your dark chapters by yourself. And even if that means you have to get up and move back home, pack up and move back to your hometown, or just like Naomi did, right? Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughter-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her two daughters-in-law, she set out from the place she had been living, and then took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's home, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, "we want to go with you and your people." But Naomi replied, "Why should you go on with me? Can I give birth to other sons who can grow up and be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' home, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not. My daughters, go. The things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me." And again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. Look, Naomi said to her, "Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I'll be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. So the two of them continued on their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited for their arrival. "Is it really Naomi?" the women asked. So Ruth clung tightly to Naomi, and she was determined to leave her. Right, that's what the Bible said. She said, "Nothing but death can keep me from it." Right, and that's almost the exact line from a movie, The Color Purple. If you saw it, you would laugh at that. But anyways, she clung tightly to her, and that's something that you should pay attention to. Certain people that when you're going through dark times, you're gonna have certain loyal people in your life who refuse to leave you behind. Right? They refuse to let you go through your dark times alone. So pay attention to those types of people, right? They're valuable, super valuable, and it might not be many of them, but even if you have one, that's a blessing. Because that in your time of need, God just might use them to help to bring you out of whatever you're going through, bring you out of your hopelessness, right? And whatever your despair is. And the name Ruth, it actually means friend, right? Or compassionate friend in Hebrews. So Ruth the Moabite means compassionate friend from the Father. We'll keep going. Ruth chapter 2, verse 1 through 12. Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. One day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields and pick some stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." So Ruth went out and gathered grain behind the harvesters. As it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law Elimelech. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She is the young woman from Moab who came with Naomi. She asked this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few moments rest in the shelter." Boaz went over and said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other field. Stay right behind the young women working in the field. See what part of the field they're harvesting, and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly, and when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well." Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I am only a foreigner." "Yes, I know," Boaz replied, "but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." So things started to look up, right, for Ruth and for Naomi. But notice that that's not a random act of kindness. Like if you're reading that, you might miss that. You might just think, okay, yeah, things are starting to turn around for her. But that's not the case. What Ruth is experiencing is the result of something, right? She sacrificed and she had kindness towards Naomi, and that's what she's experiencing that kindness back, right? This is Ruth. She's reaping the harvest of her kindness. That the kindness seeds that she sowed to Naomi, because you reap what you sow, right? And Ruth asked Boaz, she said, what have I done to deserve such kindness? Boaz said, "I know everything that you have done for your mother-in-law," right? And this is why it's important how you treat people, because you never know when you'll need some kind of kindness, right? So you give kindness because you never know when you'll need it. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 17 says, "Your kindness will reward you, but your cruelty will destroy you." So Ruth shows us like two important things, right? For us to do when we're going through like our dark chapters. We should keep our kindness for others, because it could be that kindness that later on is going to like reward us, right, and help us to come out. And we should seek our refuge in the arms of God, right? Not alcohol, not porn, not drugs, distractions, anime, video game, like none of that. No other little g gods, right? That's what Oprah went back to, right? She went back to her gods. Remember, she left. She wanted to stay, so we don't blame her. But she eventually went back to her parents and to her little g gods. False gods, right? Idol gods, and those idols have no power to heal and to comfort, right? So seek refuge only in the arms of God. And refuge, what refuge is, that protection and that warmth and that comfort, right, that we need when we go through like cold, dark times, when we go through despair. Verse 12 says it perfect, and it's my favorite verse of like the whole book. It says, "May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." And it shows us a super important reminder, right, for us, and it tells us that the best place to run to for refuge and for hope and protection, and when we go through like our lonely times, our dark times, the best place to run to is in the arms of God. And that's important because not only is our healing from whatever we're going through found in Him, but it's also our comfort. And it's also our way out. A lot of times we get stuck there, and we don't know which way is the way out. God is the way out. So when the direction you run to is important, right? Make sure you're running towards Him, right? And that all of that is found in Him. The way out, the hope, everything is found in Him. The way I think about it is that He shines a light into our darkness, right? And that light is enough to give us warmth and guidance, right? And direction too, right? On which way we would go. When think about it like a dark room, like the room will be full of darkness, right? And somebody shines a little light into that room. So even though there's more darkness in the room, that little bit of light will cut straight through the darkness, right? And which shows which one's more powerful, right? Darkness doesn't cut through light. When that light cuts through the darkness, it shows that it has more power. Light has more power than darkness. We know that. Like that's physically true, and it's spiritually true. So no matter how much it is, light is going to be stronger. So yeah, we do all have to go through dark times and dark chapters in our life. That's true. We're all going to do that. But when we're in those dark times, right, we're not meant to stay there. Which brings me to my first point. So this point is called turn the page. So notice that Naomi, when she was going through everything she went through, she didn't stop, right? She didn't stop searching for better. No matter how dark it got in her life, if it was drought, she was moving and searching for better. If it was death, if it was grief, she was moving back home, right? She was making moves. She never settled into her dark chapters, and she never just sat there, right? And I call that turn the page. And that's a must, right? That's an absolute must for us, right? When we go through those tough times, we it's not that we want to skip the tough times, just skip them real quick and like they're not significant. It's important for us to experience, the significance of loss, that in dark seasons, but we shouldn't get stuck there, right? We don't have to stay there like forever, because our stories aren't defined by our dark chapters. Turn the page, right? Just keep turning the page until you see the whole story. And my next point is whole story. If I would have stopped Naomi's story like right at the drought or right after the death, then the whole story would have been a tragedy, and we would never know the whole story, because a story is defined by the end, right? Not the beginning or the middle, but the end. That's how we know a story. And if you stop your story too soon, then it will be a true tragedy, because you never know how it ends, right? That would be like me taking this book and reading up to the part where it goes bad, and then as soon as it starts to go bad, I rip it. I stop my story right there. That wouldn't even be the whole. That wouldn't be the whole story. It wouldn't even be a proper end, right? It wouldn't even look right. The page would be hanging and everything. That's not and that wouldn't be a proper end. Read the whole story, right? Know what the whole story is. See what your whole story is. Let it play out, so you can get. And then right now you wouldn't have, if I stopped right there, I wouldn't have an accurate like assessment of the chapters in my life, right? Because I don't know the rest. No, like, you turn the page and you know the whole story, so you can get an accurate depiction, an accurate assessment of certain characters, certain times, incidents in your life, and seasons too, right? Because sometimes the things that we go through is just a season in our life, right? It's just a chapter, or a paragraph, right? In the whole story of our life, our dark seasons might just be one chapter or this much, right? But sometimes I get it, because we get into such like dark times, and sometimes they can get real dark, and we can't see a way out, right? We can't see that light, or at the end of the tunnel, or the brighter future, whatever it is. We can't. It's just darkness, right? We get so caught in the moment and stuck in the moment that we don't let it pass by, right? And we just can't see our way out, so we become hopeless, right? Our heart becomes sick, like the Bible said. And now, so I'm not telling you, like, when you're in those times, I'm not telling you just put your hope towards the end, right? Because that sometimes that could be too far, and if that's too far of a stretch for you to hope for a better end, in the end of your life, then that can make your heart sick too, right? Because that's hope deferred, right? That's stretched out way too far, especially if you're right here. So set your sights. If you're in that and you can't see a better future, then set your sights on something closer, right? So just turn the page. Set your sights on the next sentence. What would tomorrow be like? What would next week be like? Next month, the next chapter, right? Just keep on living, and move on to the next paragraph, because sometimes you just a sentence away, and you don't even know it, right? Sometimes that's all it takes for you is just one page turn, and you have a different story, right? It changes, right? Ruth, she found favor, right? So she found favor with Boaz. We just read that, and I can't read all of it, but what happens is she does find favor with Boaz, and he continues to show her kindness. She gathers more grain. She brings it back to Naomi. And then Boaz lets her work in his fields, right, for the rest of the harvest. So she's getting food, right? She's getting more and more stable. So Ruth chapter 3, verse 1 through 11. One day Naomi said to Ruth, "My daughter, it's time that I found a permanent home for you, so that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours, and he's been very kind by letting you gather grain with his young women. Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Now do as I tell you. Take a bath and put on perfume, and dress in your nicest clothes. Then go to the threshing floor. But don't let Boaz see you until he has finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do." "I will do everything you say," Ruth replied. So she went down to the threshing floor at night and followed the instructions of her mother-in-law. After Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he lay down at the far end of the pile and went to sleep. Then Ruth quietly uncovered his feet and lay down. Around midnight, Boaz suddenly woke up and turned over. He was surprised to find a woman laying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she replied. "Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," Boaz exclaimed. "You are showing even more family loyalty now than you did before, for you have not gone after a younger man, whether rich or poor. Now don't worry about a thing, my daughter. I will do what is necessary, for everyone in town knows you are a virtuous woman." So Ruth's story was looking dark, and hopeless, right? And now there's some hope. Now there's a brighter future, and a more secure future. And remember I said that the book of Ruth is happening at a time of transition, right? From a time of instability to a time of establishment and foundation. Ruth, she's in that same process. She's in the process of being established and secure, right, on a foundation. Now let's jump to the end because that's the best part of the story, right? Ruth chapter 4, verse 13 through 17. So Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law, who loves you and has been better to you than 7 sons." Naomi took the baby and cuddled him to her breast, and she cared for him as if he were her own. The neighbor women said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again," and they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. So I told you it's a good story, right? It's a happy ending, and that's our happy ending. That's what we wanted. And what makes it so good is that there was some tragedy, right? And there had to be some tragedy that was overcome. There was some suffering that had to be experienced in a story that's called the conflict, right? So the conflict is something that the character they have to overcome. Right, and it's a key part of a story, right? It's a key component. It shows us that suffering is key, right? It's key in our lives, in our life story. So even though that suffering is a element, we have to have it. It's a key element and we need it. We're not to get stuck there, right? We don't get stuck in our suffering because that's not our whole story. Our whole story is not defined by that little piece. By that dark chapter. And I say that to say this: don't judge or misjudge your story based on a few dark chapters, right? You can't get an accurate depiction. You can't get an accurate story. You can't get an accurate look at your whole story if you stop too soon. And some of us, we experience that hardship in our teens or 20s or 30s, whenever we experience it, right? And we're ready to just give up on life, right? We think that it can't get any better. We get hopeless and we're done. Don't go by chapter 20, right? Chapter 20 out of what? Out of 70 or 80? Don't close your book, or don't tear your story too soon, right? Just turn the page, right? Don't end your story too soon. Don't end it in you don't even know the end. Or the middle. Sometimes it's true. We don't even get to the middle of our story. Sometimes the middle is good. We sometimes it's just that little part. And most of us, when we hit those trials and that heartache or trouble or if it's trauma, sometimes struggle. When we hit that part, we're done. We're ready to close the book, not even realizing that it's like 20 chapters left. 30, 60 chapters, 80 chapters left in our story, and we don't wait to see what's next. And sometimes it don't even take all of this, right? Sometimes our better is on the next page, but we never get to see it, right? So the story turns. All we have to do is just like go to the next chapter, right? So don't do that. Don't judge your story by its beginning chapters or by its bad chapters. Right? Don't end it too soon. The end is the best part anyway, right? It always is. So I wanted to ask you this question on the protagonist, right? Because conflict is important in the story, but the protagonist is too. And what that is just the main characters, right? So when we read Ruth, it's hard for us to know who the main character is, right? Who is that protagonist? But in Ruth's, it start with Elimelech, right? And then he dies, and then we follow Naomi, and then we follow Ruth, and the book is called Ruth, but then here comes Boaz, right? And then at the end, another character comes, Obed. They have a baby, Obed, but then Naomi takes the baby back and cuddles him. So it's hard to know who the main character is, right? But I'll tell you this: the main character in Ruth's story is an unseen character, right? An unmentioned character, And we get a hint at who it is in chapter 4, verse 17. The neighbor women said, now at last Naomi has a son again, and they named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. So that unseen, unmentioned character, that person is the whole reason why Ruth and Naomi even met, right? It's the whole reason why even Boaz, his story has a happy ending, and Ruth's story have a happy ending. And that same character is the main character that should be included into your story, right? And I'll tell you, it's not David. And I thought you probably thought it was David because it ended with David. But no, the main character his name's not David, but he is called the Son of David. His name is Jesus, right? Jesus Christ. He's the son of David. So listen to what this is how Jesus says it. In Revelation 12 and 16, he said, I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give this message for the churches. I am both the source of David and the heir to his throne. I am the bright and morning star. So in the beginning, remember I said that God gave the children of Israel, the nation of Israel, he was getting them into a Davidic covenant, right? A Davidic contract, and where he promised them a king through King David, right? You can read that exact covenant in 2 Samuel chapter 7, but God promises them, he promises King David that he would have an heir to his throne that would last forever, right? So Jesus is that descendant of King David, he is the heir to the throne, right? And that'll last forever. So now you see that Boaz and Ruth and Naomi, Boaz and Ruth had to meet, right? They had to get married. They had to have a son, Obed, who would have a son, Jesse, who would have a son, David. He would become king, but more importantly, he became the ancestor of our king, Jesus. Right? So God had a plan all along, which means that it was necessary for Naomi and Ruth to suffer the way that they did, because it led them on their path to destiny, right? It led them on the path to greatness. And now look, they forever they're in the bloodline of Jesus Christ, the Lord and Savior Jesus. That was God's ultimate plan, right? Without Jesus, Ruth and Naomi's story it's a good one. Right, I ain't gonna lie, it's a real good story. But with Jesus, Ruth and Naomi's story is awesome. It's timeless, right? Jesus makes the story make sense, right? He makes the suffering make sense. He makes that story great. He makes this story great, and that's just what he does. That's who he is. Your story is the exact same. It's no different. It's no different than anyone else's story. If you add Jesus to the story, to your story, he'll make it all make sense, right? He'll bring it all together. And those dark chapters, they'll have meaning, right? He'll turn them around, like for your good. And not only that, but he'll walk with you through the dark chapters, so you're not alone, right? And so you have strength and comfort when you need it. Remember what Jesus said? He said, I am the bright and morning star, right? He's the light and the warmth that shines in darkness, right? He can shine in your darkness if you let him, right? That's how he shows up, right? And just having his presence with you, not even him doing anything, just having him with you, he'll bring light to your darkness, and that warmth, the comfort, direction. He'll bring his company, peace, joy, and hope, right? You won't be hopeless. And one day somebody is gonna get the benefit of you telling your story. That's called a testimony, right? That's one of the purposes of why you go through everything that you go through, and you make it through hard times, right? It's to help somebody else make it through their hard times. Because one day they're gonna be faced with the darkest times in their life and some dark chapters that they have to live through, right? And one day they're gonna be right in the middle of it, in the middle of their darkest hour, and they're gonna cross paths with you, and God's gonna bring them. He'll bring them right to you, right? And so he'll bring them to you so you can encourage them to keep going, just to turn the page. And then you'll be able to point them to the light, right? Point them to where they can get hope, that light in Jesus. So you can tell them that if it had not been for Jesus coming into your life when he did, you would have been stuck in your darkness, right? Without hope and any sense of direction. Revelations 12:11 says, and they, which is us, have defeated have defeated him, the devil, the one who deceives the world, right? The one who's deceiving you and somebody, whoever else, into believing that their life can't have a good end or be a good story, right? The devil, the enemy of your souls, and they have defeated him by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony. So Jesus already shed his blood, right? He sacrificed for us. He's the Lamb of God. So the blood of the Lamb, that part is already done. We have the other part, right? And we already have victory. So we have victory by what Jesus did. He won that victory already. So but we also defeat our enemy with the word of our testimony. So you have to make it through. No question. You have to. You got to get through your dark times because you already have victory, and because someone else is going to need your testimony. They're going to need your story to make it through their story. So your suffering is not all about you, right? And your story is not all about you. Just like Ruth's story, it wasn't all about her, right? It was about Jesus, and it was about us. We overcome by the word of Ruth's testimony. We're the ones that benefit from her story. And we overcome by the word of your testimony. So remember a few things, right? Be encouraged, make it through, turn the page, see your story through to the end, right? Include the main character, Jesus, into your story, and be a Ruth to somebody else. I'm going to catch y'all next time.